Okay, we're going to talk about next stratified squamous epithelium. So we've done simple, simple squamous, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar. Now we're going to talk about stratified squamous, so multiple layers of squamous epithelium. And we're talking about stratified epithelium. We're going to talk about squamous, and then I think we got a couple pictures of cuboidal, maybe a columnar one also. Stratified squamous epithelium is it's found in a bunch of places. Skin is where you find keratinized, and mucosal surfaces. So this will be more skin, and this is on mucosal surfaces, and those are moist, soft surfaces. All right, next slide. So here's some stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, so it doesn't have keratin in it. And this is the wall of the vagina. So you have, because you're going to produce a lot of cells, and they go and they slough off, and so then you produce more. So what happens is the bottom layers down here, these guys are actually close to, if you notice, the bottom layer is close. They're all real close to this blood vessel down here. So these guys are getting lots of food. Okay, the guys on the bottom layer down here are getting lots and lots of food. The guys at the top layer are not getting much food because they're far away from the blood vessels. And actually what happens is these cells, as they migrate, they're produced down here, and these cells divide at the basement layer, and as they move up, they die. So these cells at the top often aren't even alive anymore. So you can just slough them off, and it doesn't matter. You're making more, and they're pushing up cells from the bottom. As they get farther away from the blood vessels, they die because they don't get nutrients to those, because nutrients don't diffuse that far. So let's see. You have this is connective tissue down here. Oops, I guess I've got it written all there already. And this is stratified squamous epithelium up in this part here. So you can easily see the multiple cell layers there. And since the top layer is a flattened cell, then that makes it squamous. You look at the apical layer, and that's what that means right there, flattened. So it's the cell at the apical surface determines what type of tissue it is. So it's flattened cell there, so it's squamous epithelium. Okay, next slide. Here's a higher magnification view of the same tissue, wall of vagina. And you have, for some reason, they're pointing out a nucleus here, right there, of a squamous epithelial cell. And then you have a number 4 is nucleus of the cell in the basal layer. So this is the basal layer down here. That'd be the basal layer down here of the epithelium. And then as the cells divide and go up here, they start dying. So you have they're generally not alive as they get farther and farther away from the blood supply. And so this is stratified squamous epithelium. In this case, it's non-keratinized. I'm not going to worry about on the test keratinized versus non-keratinized. Just know that keratinized is generally meaning skin. It's got this hard keratin protein in it, and you're not going to have to worry about too much about where each of these things is located. But it helps. It's going to help you later on to fit all the pieces together as you learn these pieces throughout the semester. Next slide. Okay, so here's stratified squamous epithelium once again, wall of vagina, multiple cell layers. So this shows the epithelium, and this shows the basement membrane, and then the underlying connective tissue layer there. So that's a picture out of your guys' book, which is a pretty nice picture. Next slide. So where do you find stratified squamous epithelium? Surface of the skin is keratinized there, and then lining of the mouth, esophagus, anus, and vagina, it's non-keratinized there, because those are like the little softer places. But it's still stratified. You still have multiple layers because you need a protective barrier in those areas. So the mouth, you don't want, when you're eating food and you eat something that's a little bit sharp, say a potato chip, and it cuts your mouth, you don't want that to like just gash your mouth and make you bleed all day long. So what you have is multiple layers of epithelial there to help protect your mouth when you're eating. So, and esophagus when you're swallowing, in case you swallow something that's not chewed up completely or is maybe has a sharp edge on it. Next slide. Okay, now stratified cuboidal epithelium. Stratified cuboidal epithelium, this has 2 layers. You notice there's 2 layers of cells, and here's this right here is the space. All right, and this is from a tubule from a sweat gland. Okay, so there's sweat glands in your skin. So the sweat gland down underneath your skin, and it's sticking this little part of the sweat gland up, and you have sweat go out on the surface of your skin. And the tubule that is coming up has multiple layers, has 2 layers of cuboidal cells in it. Here's a photomicrograph of that showing the stratified cuboidal epithelium, basement membrane, and then you can see all around it is, we'll talk about what this is here in a little bit. That's connective tissue. All right, next slide. Stratified columnar epithelium. So you get this, you can find this in the salivary glands, ducts. So you have stratified columnar epithelium. You can see there's like 1 and 2 layers of rectangular shaped cells that are columnar, and since there are 2 layers of them, it's stratified. Then you have the basement membrane, and then you have underlying connective tissue. All right, next slide. Transitional epithelium, here's what we're going to look at that and see what it looks like. Transitions from cuboidal to squamous and back. It's distensible, so the urinary bladder is one of the best examples of this. So it's stratified, multiple layers, but it's transitional because it transitions from one cell shape to another one. So here's a section through a relaxed urinary bladder, and so this is transitional epithelium here, showing you the lumen. So there's space on one side of the epithelial cells. You can see these cells are relaxed, so these are considered cuboidal at this point. And then when it distends, when that lumen fills with urine, it'll stretch out, and those cells will all flatten out, especially if the thing gets really full, they'll be very flat. So it allows something that's distensible, something to relax and then go back to another shape. All right, next slide. Okay, so here will be relaxed transitional epithelium. Here's the apical surface, and you can see it's all cuboidal cells. You got the basement membrane and connective tissue layer there. So, next slide. So here's a photomicrograph of transitional epithelium, showing this is the transitional epithelium here, and this is the connective tissue. This is transitional epithelium. Okay, so it's relaxed, and so you can see this cell is roughly cuboidal shaped. This one's roughly cuboidal shaped. So you can see those, and then as it stretches out, those would stretch out and become distended. As the bladder distends, those will become flattened out. Okay, next slide. Another view of transitional epithelium. This is from your guys' book. So here's a transitional epithelium, basement membrane, and then underlying connective tissue down there. And so you can see, especially like this cell is very nicely cuboidal here. This is roughly cuboidal here. Okay. So, all right, next slide. And where do you find that? Generally the lining of the urinary bladder. You also find it in the ureters as well as the urethra. So in the urinary system. So so the ureters can distend a little bit, and the urethra can also distend as well as liquid is flowing down those. Provides a protective barrier during and permits distension, so they can expand and then they can go back. All right, next slide. The last epithelium we're going to talk about is the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, or we're going to talk about it's the last type. We talked about all the rest of them. So pseudostratified, falsely stratified columnar epithelium. Columnar cells are all differing heights. All cells touch the basement membrane, so they all come down to the bottom, and they got to, because that's where the capillaries are, but not all cells reach the apical surface. So the trachea is one of those. Places you find these. Next slide. So here's a trachea section, pseudostratified, and you can see, if you look on the right is the diagram, and they've actually diagrammed some of these kind of things out. So if I look in here and see if I can find one, here's a good one right here. Cell goes up and comes back down. Doesn't reach the apical surface. So here's one that's kind of wider, and then it comes down, and it's going up there. So you can see it looks like a jumble of cells, and there's multiple cell layers, but it's really not. So it's false stratification. It's pseudostratified, and this also has cilia on it. So it's also ciliated columnar epithelium. So this is called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. And then you also have goblet cells. I was trying to see if there's a good cross section through one. I don't see one that shows the goblet shape in this. Anyway, but here's so goblet cells. There's all these kind of clear zones that are in here. So here's part of a goblet cell. Here's part of a goblet cell. Here's another part of one over here. There's another one over here. So then you have the cilia on top. Next slide. And we can see the goblet cell here. Then we see all these different cells. You can see this cell doesn't reach the top. It stops there. So that's one. So it shows it doesn't reach the apical surface. This one goes all the way up. It comes down. Here's another one coming down here. Here's another one that doesn't go up. This guy comes down like between these guys. So that shows you it's just all this pseudostratification that's going on. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells. All right, next slide. And here's another picture out of your guys' book. So this is pseudostratified columnar epithelium from the trachea. And so this is the mucus of a goblet cell. That's what that whitish with kind of the mottled little reddish lines in there. That's the mucus in there, and then we have the pseudostratified epithelium there. Okay, next slide. So places you find pseudostratified columnar epithelium, you find it in the nasal cavity, trachea, bronchi. So, and you have cilia on it, so you can move mucus, and you have mucus that's secreted by the goblet cells into the nasal cavity, trachea, and bronchi. So that traps little particles. When you breathe them in, little particles get trapped in that, or virus particles, or bacteria, or just dirt, and it gets trapped by that. And then cilia are always moving this stuff up, so it moves it up into your mouth, and you can cough it out. It also lines larger ducts of lots of glands. The epididymis and male urethra have pseudostratified columnar epithelium, but it's non-ciliated. You don't need cilia there. So. Okay, next slide. Okay, you guys are probably ready for a little break, as am I, because we've now done epithelial cells. So we're going to do or epithelial tissues, and we're going to do connective tissues next. So we've got 4 tissues to do. We got epithelium, epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. And so connective tissue there's more connective tissues than there are epithelial tissues. So you might want to take a little break and then come back to this. So I'm going to go to the next slide and then pause and then come back to you. So